Have you ever considered buying a winery in Argentina? Our guest today has done just that. We're sitting down with Barry Morgan, founder of Familia Morgan Wineries in San Rafael, Argentina. Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. We welcome Barry Morgan, founder of Familia Morgan, to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Look forward to talking to you.
I've been excited for this one for a long time now, Barry, because I've been following you on Twitter. As soon as the first time I saw you, I was like, this is great. We got a American gringo guy in Argentina living the dream. I think you've been engaging too with people on Twitter, right? I noticed, what's his name? Geologo Trader, the Twitter guy in Buenos Aires. I think you might have sent him some bottles.
Yes, I mean, we're lots of directions we can go with this conversation. Um, I can't even tell you the year we began, other than we're probably about 15 years ago when we first went to that area of Argentina and didn't buy a winery, bought a big piece of land with some old dilapidated buildings on it
Hmm.
and lots of struggles in the beginning. The the Argentine economy is kind of a real bright spot in the world right now under the direction of Milei, their new president. But back then, it was more of crisis following crisis, and the
Yeah.
people there weren't didn't seem to be that affected by it. They had just been through so many financial crises that they just kind of rolled with the punches. As long as they had some wine to drink and some good beef to eat, life just kind of went on. And the last few years, especially until Malay made some major changes a year ago, inflation is you really couldn't even measure it. There were times when from month to month they would have 50 to 75% inflation. So when I first went there, the peso was 3 point something per dollar,
Hmm.
and it's been up to about 1,400 per dollar a couple of months ago, and it's about to come down to 1,000 pesos per dollar. And it
Hmm.
looks like Malay may link them up where you can even spend dollars in the country. So
Hmm.
we've been through lots of ups and downs. In the beginning, our land it's in Argentina. They lay out the land where they can, pretty much in squares, and the square is 1,000 meters by 1,000 meters, a kilometer by a kilometer, and you have a road on all four sides, and that equals about 10,000 square meters or 110,000 meters per hectare, and we had about 100 hectare or about 250 acres of land.
Wow. And if you'll indulge me kind of winding the clock back a quick second, just so people understand, you're American, Barry. I read the bio on the website. You were living in Georgia at the time. I believe you were a doctor, right, in the US?
I retired in 2019, 40 plus years practicing medicine. So, up until that time, going to Argentina was kind of a neat thing to do in January and February, and I would often take off that time to go there because you
Hmm.
leave the States and a day is maybe from 8 or 9 until 5 or 6 in the evening. You'd go there, it's the opposite. So long days, summer, warm in the daytime. The climate in San Rafael is cool in the evenings and mild most of the year, 300 plus days of sunshine a year, but
Nice.
only about 10 inches of rain. So you've got to supplement with water to keep plants alive. But if you
Mm.
could stick anything in the ground, if you can get water to it, it's going to flourish.
And so I'm doing the mental math here. You retired in 2019. Were you doing like part time between Argentina and the US, or how
Oh,
did
it
that
was
work?
it was it was coming and going
Coming and
a
going.
lot early on, trying to establish what's called a DNI residency
Right.
required that I go back and forth. I think I was doing it every 90 days for the first 4 or 5 years, trying to get through
Wow.
that process. So I was going back and forth a lot, but the long spells were usually in the winter.
Okay, cool. So you were going back and forth, and then what? As of 2019, are you essentially permanently based in Argentina now? I saw a nice family with the photo, I guess, in front of the winery, and it like you got all
Well,
the
that was
grandkids and stuff.
actually a family trip to a 350-year-old hacienda in Mexico. So
Mm.
I wish that was our property. It's like a museum when you go to that place. But our our property, we don't have any structure quite that grand. We but we basically inherited old dilapidated house. Uh, we built a kitchen because the existing kitchen was more like a hallway. Um, there was an old stable that we built out, and then since then we've rehabbed other ruins on the property and added the bodega. We're currently expanding the bodega, but I'm in the U.S. right now. I'm going
Hmm.
and we'll be here probably through the end of the year and return in January.
Hmm.
I've got a big family. You could tell by that photo. 4 children, all married, 16 grandchildren. And
Congrats.
two of those families will be there. Most of the time, I'm there after January. Another son and his family are going down in a week, and they'll be there for a month or so before I get back.
And did any of the kids marry an Argentine citizen and get the
Actually,
cross
my
thing?
middle son did. And then they both wanted to come back to the U.S. after that. They were stuck living in a little house out on the prairie their first 9 months or so of their married life, waiting to get a visa so he could bring his wife back to the U.S.
Hmm. And they
And her,
decided
but
to stay in the
her
U.S.
family's from Buenos Aires, and she has a big family there, so they're traveling down probably in 2 or 3 weeks. They haven't been there in a few months.
Okay, so it sounds like the whole family is kind of going back and forth, and San Rafael's kind of like the winter home in a way.
But when I first found that property, I was actually looking for what people refer to as a bolt hole, and I was looking Chile and Argentina, and just like in the news now with scares about we could be in a nuclear war, things could go crazy. That just, if you assess it, there's not many places in the world that should be
Right.
safer.
So
Those
by
people have
bullhole,
been,
you mean Plan B.
yeah, right, exactly. And those people have been through so many tough times that they'll just roll with the punches. You know, if they know how to grow things, they know how to get some beef, There's wine everywhere. They would be well equipped if the economy's blowing up worldwide.
This is true. This is something we tweet about a lot, right? Kind of the
Exactly.
best World War III Plan B is South America.
So
And
you've
is
read
that something
about
you were
some
you
of
were?
our travails when we began.
No, tell me. I mean, that's the hard part, right? Is the beginning. So
Oh,
bring me through the early days.
some of those stories we can laugh about them now. They weren't funny at the time. The Right after I bought the property, I mean, Argentina doesn't have violent crime per se, but with horrible economy and poor people, petty theft's a big issue. And right
Mm,
after we bought the property, actually at one time, somebody took their horse and hooked it up to buried electric cable in the ground to pull it out of the ground to salvage for any copper to sell it.
hmm hmm
The I've actually one time we lost power and somebody had actually climbed a pole off our property but very near to it, and I'm sure those guys get electrocuted regularly, but he had clipped the wires. They knocked the transformer off of the platform, and it built a fire to melt down the transformer to retrieve the copper. I'm sure emitting all those toxic, what are they, PCBs, or there's
Yeah.
a chemical in those transformers that's very toxic. But in the early years, I actually wasn't thinking wine at all, mainly
Mm.
because there's wine everywhere. Most of it's very established, and it just looked like a crazy business model to try and go into wine to pay the bills. Just so competitive, so much wine.
And a lot
Most
of
of it,
capex, right? You got to get these big vats and stuff.
but they, it was 20, 30 years ago, South American wine was not very modern. Probably a little further back than that. That was when the big guys, the Michel Rolland, and some of those guys started coming and bringing some modern techniques. But prior to that, most of the fermentation was in these giant cement tanks that had stainless doors on them to climb in and clean them out at the end of the fermentation process. And it wasn't the most scientific wine production by any means. And they were everywhere. And ruins from old bodegas that had been closed years before. And most of those also had an olive orchard with them to harvest
Mhm.
olives for the oil. So you can still drive around and see those ruins that have never been repaired and the remnants of old olive trees around.
So bring me more through what you were thinking in the early days and how you kind of took it from, a dilapidated property, not sure what to do with it, all the way to now. I mean, the brand looks great. Everything. I mean, uh, it's all
It was
super
quite the
dialed in.
journey. We tried several things and failed. I recently wrote on Twitter X about one of our forays was into beef cattle. And an attorney I had, his father was also an attorney, but had retired and raised these high genetic black Angus cows. And
Mm.
his strains were so good that he often won the big competition in Buenos Aires every year. But one of them, and this probably goes back 12 years or so, but I bought 8 bred heifers from him, and we were in the cattle business. The and was doing well. I kind of followed his advice. I got a high genetic champions type bull every year to rebreed the cows back to. A couple of
Hmm.
years we were up to 30 something head of cows. And then the president of the country decided to block the export of beef. So we had to exit that business endeavor. And I had a time when we grew alfalfa to sell, and another time grew garlic. And most of our ventures just failed. We originally were planning to do olives, but we were a little too far south for olives, and they call them agricultural engineers. But the one I worked with convinced me to consider the grapes, and I basically not well researched, knowing what I was doing, but trusting him, started down the grape path 10 years ago. We had some old wines of Cabernet Sauvignon,
Hmm.
but we're now, I would guess without looking at the tables, probably 80 of 250 acres or more planted in various grape varietals. Started making wine probably 9, 10 years ago. Our fortuitously fell in the lap of a really good winemaker. Some of the wine we made, 2019, 2020, won gold medal in the blind taste test in Mendoza. And the first time it happened, they're pulling the bottles out of the socks so nobody can tell what bodega the wine came from.
Right.
The story I heard, because I wasn't there when it happened, was they're kind of looking at the bottle like, "What's this? Whose wine is this that we just gave a gold medal to?" And we weren't. Yeah, there's some major money down there invested in vineyards, as you
Yeah.
might imagine, in the Mendoza
I've heard.
province.
I've heard. Yeah. In San Rafael. Maybe you could actually tell us what's kind of the difference between San Rafael and Mendoza from a wine perspective and economic, cultural perspective.
Mendoza, we're in Mendoza province. Mendoza City is the northern part of that province. San Rafael's the southern portion of the province. Along the Andes, there's a famous area called Valle de Uco, and
Hmm.
there's some big name wines that are grown in that area. Big, well funded international money that started those bodegas, and they produce lots of wine up there. The it's all considered high desert. The water comes from glacial and snow melt runoff that comes out of the Andes Mountains and rivers. Where we are in San Rafael is where two rivers get very close, and you can tell over many centuries they probably collided and moved around, and that area
Hmm.
gets the erosion from the Andes and all the different rock layers and minerals and all that come down from these two river valleys. And that's
Hmm.
what created the soil where we are, is all that debris that came off the Andes mountains from the glacial runoff over the years. And that water is very pristine and
Hmm.
valuable, as you might guess.
The Rio Diamante.
Yeah, those rivers are close to us. They all now have reservoirs. The reservoirs are the the water from those reservoirs is collected in the spring when it's, raging rapids coming out of the mountains. And then they release that water throughout the spring, summer, and fall months through a canal system originally dug probably at the direction and labor of monks that had come to South America.
Cool.
I guess what is that, 150 plus years ago, and
Sure, the
dug these
Jesuits or something.
canals everywhere. And they call them gates, but they'll put a block in the canal and then open up a path where that water can run out. And we originally irrigated that way probably 12, 15 years ago. We now use drip irrigation, but
Mm. That's like where
the
the little tubes go, like follow the
yeah,
trees.
kind of like a black plastic tube, and then it's got an emitter by each
Uh huh.
plant, and then you can control how much water is coming out by the
Uh huh.
size of the emitter, and
Uh huh.
then you can have very good control over the water, and you don't waste a lot of water when it's just raging. And the way and these rules were established at least 100 years ago, and properties will have water rights to take water out of those canals. And
Hmm.
we still have 34 hours, I think it is, every 8 days of water. So every eighth day, we can
Hours
open
of
our
water.
gate, and all that water is
Uh-huh.
coming down our ditches. And we have to control where we send that water to get the most of it. Now we capture it in a big pond called a repressa, and then we pump
Uh-huh.
the water out of that pond through this drip system that goes throughout the 250 acres.
250 acres. And Barry, I have so many questions, but I recently did some wine tours in the Niagara Falls region of Ontario. Not sure if you've ever been up there. Um, But what I noticed was that the properties were pretty small. Like I visited a bunch of wineries and they got the building and they got the big vats and the tanks and stuff. And you could see the whole winery end to end within eyesight. Like they weren't that big. I don't know if they were 20 acres or 40 acres. So it's possible to do a lot with less space than you think. So yours is actually reasonably big at 250 acres, right?
That's an interesting point in that there's many different ways you can go in the wine business, and the maybe the people smarter than me would just bite off something that's easy to chew and swallow. And 20 acres, and it's maybe you and your wife or your kids working it, doing the harvest, making the wine, and you're not dependent on having extra employees around at the right time to get work done that has to be done in the next few days.
Hmm.
The other part of the wine business, if you're trying to pay the bills from selling your wine, is you're up against these super well funded multinational corporations.
Right. Or like
And then
billionaires with pet projects as well.
and their business model that I'm always moaning about and Argentina is known for cheap wine. And the slogan is under promise and over deliver. So surprise people with the quality of your wine. But at the same time, all these big producers wanting to get an edge.
This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Crema Social. Crema Social is like TikTok for international dating. It's an app you can download right now on your phone, and 3 out of 4 people on Crema are single women. The app was founded in Colombia, so unsurprisingly, there are a lot of Latinas on the app, by the way. So, how does it work? Crema Social is a social meal experience where you invite a hot girl for a lunch date via video call and food delivery. New concept, so you'll have to try it out for yourself, but this is probably the best way to meet Latinas before you visit the country. So if you're in Latin America or planning to visit Latin America, download Crema Social now and start getting dates right away. There will be a link in the description to download, or just search Crema Social on your favorite app store. Have fun, guys. This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Bit Refill. Bit Refill is the best way to spend your crypto in Latin America. Purchase gift cards or mobile refills from more than 3,500 brands in 186 countries instantly, safely, and privately. You can also apply the code MyLatinLife at checkout to get 10% back on your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information. This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Job Stacking. If you are a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then Rolf Holtze, the author of Job Stacking, guarantees you'll be able to double your income. This is the exact system Rolf has used to take his own income and those of many others beyond $20K a month. So what is job stacking? It's this idea of working multiple remote jobs. You might have heard Rolf, he's worked 5, 7, even 9 remote jobs at the same time before. And by the way, job stacking works equally well for non-technical roles. So no, it's not just for the nerds. So if you're ready to job stack, then book a discovery call with Job Stacking and see how they can double your income in just 9 weeks. In the show notes in the description, there will be a link where you can book a call directly on the Calendly of Job Stacking and be talking with them as early as tomorrow about how to double your income as quickly as possible.
And it may not be all of their wine, but at least their low tier wine, they sell it. Most of the U.S. is under what's called a 3-tier system. So there's an importer, and there's a wholesaler, and then there's a retailer. And as you might imagine, every step of the way, somebody wants to take a fair amount of the money out of the system and mark it up again.
Yep.
But knowing that, and you see a wine for sale in the grocery store for $8 or $9, and I can do the math backwards, and I'm thinking, well, maybe they produce it for $2 a liter, 750 ml bottle in Argentina, but then they had to ship it to the U.S. and import it. And then the importer wants some money, and they're going to sell it to the wholesaler, and the wholesaler is going to add another 30+% to it and sell it to the retailer, the store, the restaurant, and they often are marking up maybe as much as doubling the price of whatever they paid. A high-end restaurant, maybe 3 times the price of what they paid. So when I see a wine in Costco that's $8, it just mystifies me that they can go through all those steps and pay the bills, the cost of what it took to get that wine in the bottle and in a Costco store.
And I guess we can shout out your website because you've managed to figure out a way to export your wine to the U.S. You have a U.S. Online store, right?
Our website is Familia, FAMILIA Morgan.com. And you can actually get routed through the website to what's called DTC, direct to consumer, where most states, not every state, but most states, you can go on that website and purchase wine. The particular varietal that I was talking about that won the gold medal twice, again this year, is a Reserva red blend. And if you buy 4 bottles there, I think the shipping's free and you get a discount. So it ends up being a pretty good deal because somebody else has got to pay for the shipping. Us,
Mhm.
it gets passed on to us, but it makes it a pretty economical way to buy.
There you go, guys. FamiliaMorgan.com. If you're in the US listening to this, which I think 35% of my audience is or something, go buy a bottle or two, right? Story that you can tell over the holidays. I only get $5 per bottle. No, I'm joking. I get nothing. We're promoting this for free. Because I just have so many questions. I'm very excited about this because Barry. Just so you know, this is something I've always wanted to do. I'm like, should I do a mezcal in Mexico? Should I do a coffee farm in Panama or Mexico, or should I do wine somewhere? Like, I'm gonna do one of these things for sure.
Well, some are definitely less intense, less work. The olive farm ideas, they don't require a lot of effort. There's a time of harvest, and many olive oil producers, somebody else does all of that for them. So there are definitely choices you can make that would require you to be there more on a daily basis than others. So you got to be careful. I like coffee too. That's similar. You just have to have the right land, right altitude, good rainfall, and then it's there's some maintenance, but primarily you just have to harvest those beans and get them to market.
And I guess you got to have a good local team, especially because you're going back and forth. You referenced some of your teammates on the websites. There's a Italian name there. There's a Nunez name. So there's a couple names that you shouted on the website. But tell me about team building and finding like a farm manager. How do you set up a win-win for them? Tell me a bit more about that.
The I would say the biggest thing is just respecting the people that you work with. The But we definitely stepped our toe, especially in the early years, and we had a lot of turnover, and then it after maybe 4 or 5 years, it started settling down. I had some good guys that would manage it when I would come and go. Um, you're always a little anxious because you have to sign a power of attorney, and they could actually, if you were gone and not there, they could sell your farm and pocket the money. So you have to build trust with who you're working with, and those things only happen over time. You just relationship. I recently wrote about the relationship. The Argentine culture is very family focused,
Hmm.
and the asado, the barbecue, is part of the culture. The That's something that is just part of life. We when we in the early years, we'd go to a restaurant at 9 in the evening, and we'd
Hmm.
be my wife and I'd be the only ones in the restaurant. It's like, well, what's going on? This not must not be a good place to eat. And maybe 9:30, the little grandmas would show up and they'd be ordering these liter bottles of cerveza and starting to get into it. And at 10, there's not a place you can find to sit down there. And we'd be, we were gringos. We were ready to go to bed at long before that, but you had to wait till 9 for the restaurant to open. And when we'd leave, there'd be little kids they've already eaten all they're going to eat in the restaurant, and they're outside playing. And that was just the culture. Come together, hang out, enjoy each other, hours together. A meal, a rapid meal is probably 2.5, 3 hours. So,
That's
so,
fast.
so even fast food's probably an hour experience there. But it's all culture, getting together, getting spending time together, being with your family.
So tell me this: when it came to finding a farm manager, that's probably not the right term, but did you try to recruit someone locally from San Rafael, or did you have to recruit from like internationally or other recruitment sources, or how did you find people?
Well, the and I'll separate this a little bit. The Argentine term is encargado, and
Incurgado.
that's the guy that lives on your property. He's kind of responsible for it day and night. And when you find a good one, you want to keep them happy. But in fact, I had a conversation with Mario, the guy that's worked for us for probably 7 years or so recently, and in the beginning he was a little. I could tell he was a little distraught, upset because some things hadn't been going the way he wanted them to. And so I resolved all that. And then when I told him, it's like, Mario, you're going to want to retire sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. I just want you to know you can stay on the farm as long as you want to. If we got to build you another house or something, we'll do it. But you and your wife, your kids come and go. They're all older now. And he was just lit up to hear that somebody would think enough of him to kind of offer him, like, you can get old and die here if you want to. We're not going to run you off. You've been valuable for a long time. We know you. We know your family. You know, you're part of our extended family now. So, but finding the right one that takes responsibility, takes ownership, wants to do whatever needs to be done. Doesn't matter if it's 2 in the morning. If the water's leaking somewhere, they're going to be up paying attention to it, and you don't even have to ask. They usually found out about it before you did.
Hmm.
But very, very valuable person. And I would oppose that with. I've also had farm managers, and they're the occasional visitor with direction. They usually are, you know, doing things with the city or the state or acquiring materials that you need, that sort of thing, but totally different than the guy that's there day and night working, living on the
Hmm.
farm.
The encargado. And how do you structure a deal for the encargado? Obviously, they get to live for free, which is nice. Do you give them like a percentage of, or like, do you incentivize them based on grape production, or how do you kind of do it?
That would be, most of them don't think that way. They just want to know, okay, they want to have a place to live. They want to be able to have transportation, like their time off, they can go to town and shop or whatever they need to do. They The state, up until now at least, has always determined the rate that they're paid at, and I have to remind them regularly. It's like, I know you're only getting this much money, but the state's getting about 50 or 60% of that amount, the taxes that have to be filed. So it's a pretty socialistic government in the past.
Hmm.
Not, hopefully, Malay's going to change all that. I recently gave a couple of really important guys extra money on an ongoing basis from that government established rate that they get paid,
Hmm.
telling them that, things are tight in Argentina for the moment. I'm sure the government's going to come back and raise everybody's wage scale, but I'm going to give you more money, at least for now, until that happens, because things are relatively frozen, especially in that wage arena at the moment.
Okay, makes sense. So kind of like live for free, access to like a company car and minimum wage, and that should be good enough for most people, I think.
Yeah, they and a very simple life. They get up, have breakfast with their family. They work. They take a long siesta in the afternoon. Go back, maybe work another hour or two in the afternoon. They're there with their family, their dogs. Just pretty simple life that they don't seem to really be that motivated to change. They're kind of happy with that farm lifestyle. Somebody else
Hmm.
being responsible for some of those things. Whether that'll change with new generations or not, I'm not sure. I would
Yeah.
think it. I see a little bit of that movement with the young ones. They're learning
There's
more.
always going to be some hippies.
Yep.
uh, I have tons more questions. So here's one, Barry. Is so now you're winning premios, you're winning prizes, gold medal, Argentina, amazing. I've read that in the wine industry, it's like they don't respect new wineries, and I read about kind of in France how they have like different crews or different kind of levels, ABC. I'm not sure how it works, and it's like people will spend their whole lifetime trying to go to a higher echelon in terms of like making their farm more prestigious in a higher classification of winery, things like that. Maybe it's a little bit less rigid in Argentina, but did you find that to be the case that for the first couple of years, maybe they didn't respect your wine just because it was new or the trees weren't old enough yet, but now you're kind of like you're getting there?
I would say everything you said is true. The but most of the pressure I think is economic. That if you don't have the wherewithal, the resources to play the game, they're gonna chew you up. Just like I talked about that three-tier system in the U.S., most of those
Hmm.
laws have been on the books, maybe 100 years in the U.S. I believe they were primarily established because the big alcohol sellers wanted to make it difficult for somebody new to be a startup in the business.
Right.
And because of the way they could control that system, they could crush the young guys. And that's what we're up against now. We're you know we're not super well funded. We're not super big. We don't have clout. So even to get a wholesaler to talk to us, to even consider our wine is difficult. The wine market is pretty saturated. There's tons of wine. A lot of wineries worldwide are struggling, closing, shutting down. You can read stories about that on a regular basis. So
Mm.
definitely a very competitive market, and I would say rigged against a young guy, a young operation, figuring it out and surviving long enough to get over the hump and actually make some money. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but it's tough on multiple fronts.
I can imagine. And doing business in a foreign country, foreign language as well.
Yeah, you would think it'd be good enough just to make a great wine, but I heard I think I listened to a podcast in the last few days where they were talking about universally, even in Europe. which everybody reveres, Italian wine, French wine. But even in Europe, if you go back 30, 40 years, that the wine was really crappy. It's only when they started fine tuning some of the what's considered the modern science, but
Mhm.
hygiene, cleanliness, control, watching the bacteria, watching the alcohol content as it ferments, bottling it correctly, storing it correctly. Before that, it was done so horribly that most wine wasn't that good. There were some great producers, but now most of the wine worldwide is actually really good quality, high quality. And to distinguish yourself above the run of the mill wine is difficult because you got to be making a really good wine to distinguish
Mhm.
yourself from everyone else out there making good wine.
Definitely makes sense. And you're probably one of the only winery owners on Twitter that I've seen. I mean, was that something that was strategic to create more opportunity, or is it just something you're kind of having fun with, shit posting, or how do you see
I
it?
I wish that we could take credit for being so smart and strategic and executing our plan. I mean, a lot of it's trial and error and smashing your thumb with the hammer and trying to
Hmm.
remember not to swing the hammer like that again in the future. I mean, and so lots of errors, lots of faults, lots of problems, catastrophes, but we started and we haven't given up. We thought it would have been good enough just to make a really good wine, but now we're in the business of selling a really good wine. That may
Hmm.
be harder than making a good wine. It's a it's definitely a challenge every step of the way.
The
But
marketing.
but you'll have to come someday and visit. It's the culture, the climate, the landscapes. It is really worth experiencing.
I'm gonna make it happen. I know when I was in Paraguay over the summer, you guys I think were like able to ship the wine to Paraguay. We have a lot of audience in Asunción, Paraguay. Are they able to get it there?
We're not. We're only shipping really to the North American market right now, other than Argentina.
Hmm.
So we're distributing in Argentina, and it keeps coming up. But every time you make one of those leaps, you got a pretty big upfront cost, like because we pack it in a 40-foot container to ship,
Hmm.
and so there's a fairly big expense with just loading up the container and shipping it to whatever port you're going to go to. Then you got
Right.
to go through all the legal hoops, different layers of licensing and permitting. We know that we could probably do fairly well in Europe just from contacts and friends and that sort of thing, but that'll be a pretty big step, and we're committed to make it in North America before we get too ambitious to go anywhere else.
All right.
And we're not a
What about
we're not a
Paraguay?
huge producer. Yeah, Paraguay is a neat place. My wife reminds me, there was a time probably 10 years ago when I started a bank account there and never
Uh-huh.
successfully got my money back from the. But that was one of the steps that you had to do is in the citizenship application process.
Uh-huh.
Have you been to Iguazu, the falls?
I've been at Iwazu multiple times. So you're a Paraguay residency holder as well?
No. I started the process and didn't complete the process, but one of the steps was you had to have some money in a bank account
Yeah,
there.
yeah. I think you had to put 5K in a bank. Yep.
Yeah, but
By
it's
the
a
way,
cool
you don't have to do that
place.
anymore. Just so you know, and for the audience, the audience's FYI as well, you don't have to put 5K in the bank in Paraguay anymore. as of about a year and a half ago. So they got rid of that. All you need these days is a birth certificate and a police check, and you can get residency in Paraguay. Just fun fact there.
I lo-
Um,
we really like Paraguay because they have these incredible wood species there.
mm,
There's wood from Paraguay that you could throw it out on the ground and come back in 10 years and it will not have rotted. Just so durable, but it's like picking up steel when you move it around. So we have some furniture, outdoor furniture that's made with some of that wood from Paraguay.
hmm. Do you know the name of the tree?
Well, I know that in the U.S., one of the woods is called ipe, but they don't call it ipe in Paraguay. But the there's a guy in Cordoba that we've bought furniture from a few times, and
Hmm.
he actually will go to Paraguay and bring back the the planks, but he'll also buy old cattle fencing and that sort of thing and mill it and use that. But it wears out your tools. It's so hard.
I
It's
think I might have found it. So there's one Ipe, which is IPE, and the E has the hat
Yep.
on it. And it's also called Los Lapachos. I don't know if you recognize that name, Lapacho.
Yeah,
And
they're incredible
apparently,
woods.
it's the national tree of Paraguay, which I did not know. So that might be the one. Could be the one. Okay, limited time remaining here. I wanted to know because you kind of think of it as like a family legacy, right? The Familia Morgan and what you're building here. And I think that's like one of the greatest things a man can do, right? Have a bunch of kids, have a bunch of grandkids, build a brand, build a cool business that people enjoy sharing with others. They can, bring a bottle to family, say, hey, this is our family wine. Um, could you speak to that a little bit? Like maybe how you think about it, maybe what you've learned through that process, like maybe how you kind of structure things, or can you just talk about that a bit?
The I mean, family is one of the most important things in life. For me, it's spiritual relationship. Then I would say family, country falls in there somewhere. But we early on, when our kids were very young, we we sent them to school, and then we had experience of some of the things they're being taught in school we don't really like, and then we homeschool the kids. But we've always had a focus on family time together, everybody having a relationship long term. Not excuse me, not where they get out of high school and they kind of leave home and you only see them for the holidays after that. Where we
Mhm.
live in Georgia, there's everybody lives within probably a quarter mile of us, except for one son who's a mile and a half, 2 miles away. And when we're all at the finca together, it just requires that there's, because four families, 16 grandkids, it requires that there's definitely some overlap. But all of these grandkids, they've all grown up together. They're hanging out with each other, and they're multiple different ages from 22 down to 4 months. So there's little age grouping with the grandkids, and they literally play together all day. Um, so that family thing, that continuity, longevity of family, finding shared interests, and that was
Mhm.
a big part of forging ahead with the wine business is something that would pull. multiple generations, multiple families together to kind of work together on one goal.
Mhm.
And we never really set out that making a bunch of money was the goal, but the idea of working together and enjoying it and celebrating it and opportunity to share it with other people kind of that became the glue that kind of kept it all together.
I love it. I love it. I think that's a good note to end on.
Yeah, you're definitely going to need to schedule a trip. You'll love it there.
I thought you were gonna tell me I'm gonna need a lot of grandkids to get. So
Yeah,
I got
well,
some labor
we'll
for the
we'll
farm.
time when you're coming to visit. You can babysit some of them. We'll go off to the river.
Cool, cool. I'm down. I'm down. I saw there's some like there's even an airport in San Rafael. So guys, you got no excuses.
There is one flight most days from Buenos Aires. So we're hoping that increases a lot, but lots of buses coming and going. We're usually driving, but